It's April 2nd, 1984. 20,000 people are in the stands at the Hoosier Dome, which was 4 times the expected attendance, to celebrate the arrival of the Colts to Indianapolis, just 4 days after the Mayflower vans rolled into town from Baltimore. Indianapolis Mayor Bill Hudnut triumphantly walks out of a tunnel onto the green AstroTurf at the Hoosier Dome. Next to him is Robert Irsay. It's a striking sight. Hudnut waves to the crowd, grinning ear to ear. Then with his left hand, he grabs Robert Irsay's right hand, and he lifts it up in the air. The two men walk into the Hoosier Dome, hands held high. As Hudnut makes his way to a stage on the field, he finds the hand of Deputy Mayor David Frick, the man most responsible for nailing down the city's deal to land the Colts, and he hoists Frick's hand in the air too. Hudnut does not stop smiling. He knows the gravity of the moment. He is the mayor who brought the NFL to Indianapolis. Finally, the dignitaries of the day reach a stage on the field. Frick strides to a brown podium with 2 things on it: white letters spelling out Indiana Convention Center, Hoosier Dome. Beneath it, the NFL Shield. Frick is the MC of the day.
Good morning. What a great day for Indianapolis!
Over about 30 minutes, Indiana's business and government dignitaries take turns at the podium, drawing raucous cheers from the crowd for their role in bringing the NFL to Indianapolis. Eventually, Colts head coach Frank Kush, the hard-ass hired from Arizona State who wouldn't be coaching in Phoenix that fall, takes the mic.
The next group I'd like to introduce is what I would call Mayflower Midnight Movers. We have a couple of young kids here. They just got their honorary degree from IU. I think they're about 16 or 17-year-olds. They're geniuses. Pete Ward, that handles our administrative assistant. On behalf of the football team and the coaches and the personnel department, we want to thank you. We are going to give it the best effort to produce a winning football team here and make you proud of the Indianapolis Colts. Thank you.
Eventually, Mayor Bill Hudnut and Colts owner Robert Irsay, the guests of honor, take the podium. Mayor Hudnut gets a standing ovation, and the grin he's had splashed across his face, it hasn't faded.
This is a great day for the city of Indianapolis, and I can't tell you how proud I am to welcome Bob Irsay and the Indianapolis Colts to this magnificent facility with these blue and white seats.
Hudnut gives out keys to the city to several people, including Jim Irsay, Michael Chernoff, and Frank Kush from the Colts. And then he introduces the owner of Indianapolis's pro football team.
Now the moment we've all been waiting for, the opportunity to introduce to you the owner of the Indianapolis Colts. I'm going to read a proclamation, and then he's going to have the floor, and I'm going to give him a key to the city as well as a proclamation, because this is one of the greatest days in the history of this city, ladies and gentlemen.
After Hudnut proclaims April 2nd, 1984 as Indianapolis Colts Day in Indianapolis, he welcomes Robert Irsay to the stage. They raise their hands in the air one more time, and then Robert Irsay begins speaking to 20,000 of his newest fans.
Thank you very much. Needless to say, I'm very glad to be here. We did go through several months. It wasn't easy. We did talk to other people. I'll give you a little review of what happened, and it won't take too much time of yours. But we did talk to several other cities. We did choose Indianapolis. Your negotiator, Mr. Frick, and your mayor didn't give anything away. We had better offers. I did choose Indianapolis. I'm a Midwesterner to start with. Second of all, I think the treatment and negotiations were more than fair with this city than any others I negotiated with. So I think you could put this on a burner. This negotiation with Indianapolis was not really all for dollars. But we're very happy to be here. We're pleased at your Dome Stadium. We're pleased that the arrangements we made with your city. And we just hope that our team will back you up and take you to the spot you belong as a pro team in Indianapolis and the NFL. Thank you.
But the pomp and circumstance of the moment and the joyous looks on the faces of those at the Hoosier Dome that day were only a brief respite for a franchise that, in many ways, was completely starting over just 5 months before the 1984 season was set to begin. Pete Ward, now the Colts' chief operating officer, was an administrative assistant when the team moved in 1984.
You didn't really know where to be. We didn't have phones. We didn't have anybody to answer phones. We didn't have stationery. We didn't know what our address was. We didn't have a copier. It was just like, wow, starting a franchise from scratch, except that you had your players and your coaches under contract.
So how did the Colts go about the gargantuan task of getting their first season in Indianapolis off the ground? And back in Baltimore, what was the fallout in a region rocked by the midnight departure of their football team?
Like the Talking Heads song Life During Wartime, that gunfire and the distance, I'm getting used to it now.
Jim Irsay, the owner and CEO of the Indianapolis Colts.
It's just like so absurd that no one would possibly, you just could not believe what was going on that first year. I mean, it was just unbelievable.
This is episode 4 of The Move, Aftermath. The goal for, as Cush called them, the Mayflower Midnight Movers on March 28, 1984, was not organization. The goal was speed. It didn't matter how boxes were packed or how the trucks were loaded up. It just mattered that the boxes were packed and the trucks were loaded up before the state of Maryland could authorize the city of Baltimore to try to seize the Colts through eminent domain. And that left an absolute mess to sort through after the trucks arrived at Fall Creek Elementary School on the east side of Indianapolis. Remember what Pete Ward said in episode 3 about how the Owings Mills facility was packed up?
It wasn't like, okay, let's do this office and this office. So I couldn't be everywhere to label boxes. It was just mass chaos. And so that's how things end up being packed and shipped. And when we got to Indianapolis, it was just a big pile of boxes and desks, Weed Eubanks hat and the footballs and everything.
Ward, who was then a 20-something who described himself as, quote, cheap labor, found a mattress, he stashed it at Fall Creek Elementary School, and he went to work, both exhausted and energized at the same time.
You know what, it was, so you had so much adrenaline because you were so excited because the city was excited, it just was such a different feeling than Baltimore. So you're excited, but you're also just overwhelmed and mentally exhausted because there's so many, first of all, you hardly had any sleep and there's just so much to do.
It took about a week of nearly round-the-clock work for the Colts to get set up at their new facility, which, again, was an abandoned elementary school. And so an NFL team, which provided some of the highest-paying jobs to some of the largest men in our country, was about to set up shop in, really, an elementary school?
No one could possibly believe it. It's like we're using this grade school sports field, which was barely big enough for a football field, and we got to get this field ready in 4 weeks, for mini camp.
While Indianapolis's movers and shakers, led by Mayor Bill Hudnut, had stuck their collective necks out to build the sparkly new Hoosier Dome, the city had not also built a practice facility for an NFL team. That would come later, once a team arrived. Back in Maryland, though, the Colts complex in Owings Mills was state-of-the-art. In Indianapolis, the Colts would have to set up where children used to learn about states and art.
When we landed, they kind of buttered us up. They took us to the brand new Hoosier Dome.
John Scott was the Colts equipment manager in 1984.
And wow, was that cool. I mean, especially for an equipment guy. All our home games are in no rain, no infield, in dirt or whatever. So we saw that, and it was great. And even the seats were blue and white, like it was made for us. So now we're going to take you to the complex. I'm thinking, great. I hope it's as nice as the one in Baltimore. And we pull up to Fall Creek Elementary School. And it's like, why are we here?
A new complex for the Colts on the west side of Indianapolis, which is where the team still practices to this day, was under construction and expected to be completed in 1985. Fall Creek Elementary School was a temporary solution. The most important thing to both parties, the city of Indianapolis and the Colts, was that, the Colts were in Indianapolis.
You go inside these rooms that's going to be for the offensive linemen, and you walk in there and there's little tiny seats because it was the first grade room, you know. I thought, well, those are got to go, you know. It was a lot of ad-libbing, I guess, whatever the word is, just to try to figure out how are we going to make this work for an NFL, you know, team to be in an elementary school.
Fall Creek Elementary was indeed retrofitted to house an NFL team. Showers were put in not for 4-foot-tall kids, but for 6-foot-tall adults. Coaches and front office staffers were assigned to classrooms, and where kids were once taught multiplication was now where pro football players would be taught how to defend Dan Marino. Jim Irsay, then the team's general manager, set up his office in the school library. The cafeteria was divided into becoming the locker room, training room, and equipment room. Half of the gymnasium became the weight room.
We put a dividing wall on their old basketball court, and half was going to be the weight room. And I remember I was there late one night. Like I said, there was this wall dividing the basketball court, and then there was the weight room, which wasn't much of a weight room. But, you know, we had no security. We had and so all of a sudden, you know, it's nighttime and I'm working, and as we were working, you know, 16-hour days, I hear this. I walk into the opposite half of the basketball court, and I hear this like on the floor, you know, and I'm like, what? Is there someone in here to rip us off? I mean, I don't know. Of course, no cell phones back then. You know, what the hell am I going to do? And so, you know, I meekly peek around the corner of the wall, and Bob Turpin, he's in there with two handfuls of M&Ms going like, blah, 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 blah.
Outside, an AstroTurf field was installed, but only 70 yards could fit on the property, and there were no end zones.
They put a makeshift AstroTurf field down, and as we got into the season, I'll never forget this.
Matt Buzza was a wide receiver on the Colts in 1984.
It was raining like it can rain in the fall, early fall. And that field, we went out, and the AstroTurf field was floating. It was like floating in the top of a bathtub.
There was genuinely no spinning this any way else. This was not a situation where business staffers worked out of an office and the team practiced at a local high school or college while waiting for their new facility to open up. No, this was legitimately an entire NFL team operating out of an abandoned elementary school.
It's an elementary school. It's you walk in and it's like, yeah, I went to this school like when I was 13. That's what it was. It was a school.
Mike Chappell is entering his 40th year covering the Indianapolis Colts.
Inside you're thinking, so this is the NFL? Well, no, not really. It's the precursor to the NFL until you get your headquarters together. So, but back then we didn't worry about that because, again, as a fan base and as the media, you were just glad to be out to that facility for the reason you were.
As Colts staffers figured out what classrooms everything belonged in, they needed to hire some support staff. The team's business operations, like ticketing, marketing, sponsorships, public relations, etc., were largely left behind in Baltimore. The Colts' football operations were intact, but everything else was in disarray.
He was starting to fill the staff, and the coaches would go over to the Irish pub down the street, and several of them hired secretaries from there at lunch hour.
Poaching bartenders was one solution to the team's staffing problem, but the Colts would quickly find out that they had a problem that required more than just a quick fix.
March 29 of 84, the Colts arrive in Indy. And I still remember thinking, wow, that's kind of late, in the ticketing process to move. And I thought, wow, that's going to be pretty tough for someone over there in Indy.
That's Larry Hall, who in the spring of 1984 was a young 20-something ticketing guy for the Cincinnati Bengals. Initially, the Colts figured the staff at the Hoosier Dome could handle tickets for the 1984 season. But about a month after settling into Indianapolis, the Colts realized demand for their tickets was so high, they'd need to hire someone as soon as possible to begin managing Indianapolis's intense interest in Colts tickets.
The Irsay family reached out to the Brown family. Mike Brown calls me and, hey, Larry, how you doing? Good. So the Colts moved from Baltimore to India? Yes, sir, I do know that. And, well, they've called and asked permission to talk to you about being their lead ticket guy. And at the end of this long day, and it went really well, I was very open and honest about my experience and how I would do it if I were doing the ticket process. And at the end of the day, Bob Irsay says, "You're our guy. We want you. When can you start?" And I said, "Well, I need to go home and talk to my coach. Well, call us tomorrow. We want to know, right?" And he was very anxious. And I later found out why, because they had put out in the newspaper I remember a midnight run, everyone told me, of the newspaper had this famous application. You could order, up to 10 tickets in a 13-day window, 30,000 applications for 140,000 seats poured in a 13-day window. This is no credit cards. This is cashier's checks and money orders, no personal checks. So they shut down the post office box and returned anything that came in after that. But the building held 60,127. 60,127, that's it. So he's got a little bit of a challenge here with this ticketing demand, which is off the charts, and it's wonderful and it's great. And the enthusiasm for the team, was just at a height that I'd never witnessed before.
Larry Hall began working for the Colts in May, and he had less than 3 months to not just figure out who would get tickets, but how they would get them. First things first, though, he had to find his office, which would be in a classroom at Fall Creek Elementary.
I'm driving to the complex to go to work for the first day. I park and I go in, and a young lady named Kristen Palmore was the receptionist from the south side of Indy, and she was pretty sassy and took a high volume of calls. Everyone would know about tickets, and people from Baltimore were still threatening the Irsay family. It was terrible, right? Terrible. And she could give back pretty well to whatever she got on the phone. And I remember walking up and saying, "Well, I'm Larry Hall. I'm here to run the ticket office." She said, "Okay." And there was a long pause. And I said, "Is there somebody in particular I'm supposed to see?" She goes, "No, I don't. But there's open classrooms if you want to find one down the hallway." So I just sort of walked down the hallway, and no computer, no staff. I'm pretty sure if I didn't bring a pad and a pen to write with, there may not have been one. So when you say from scratch, I'm talking from scratch, right? I remember going into the classroom that I picked. I forget what room number it was, but the ceiling tile was kind of had a few leaks, and some of the tiles were popped up. And my wife came over, and we came from pretty humble beginnings, but she walked into that room and went, "We left Cincinnati for this?"
With demand for tickets more than doubling the Hoosier Dome's capacity, Hall would have to find a solution. Folks in Indianapolis were desperate to land tickets to watch their new team play, but not everyone would be able to get in the door. The plan then became to hold a lottery to determine who could get season tickets.
There was no Indiana lottery at that time, by the way. Mr. Irsay, Bob Irsay, Jim's father, knew the governor of Illinois. They had a lottery. He convinced him to borrow their lottery machine, put it on his private jet, strap it down, bring it over, right, to Indy, and roll that thing out.
Among those 30,000 applications, if lottery number 6 was drawn, every 6th person on the list would be able to purchase season tickets. For Jeff Haggard and his family, who were among the early winners of the ticket lottery, it felt like they won the actual lottery. Haggard has been a Colts season ticket member ever since the team's debut in Indianapolis in 1984.
It was kind of like a Willy Wonka, ticket back then, because it was all over the news. I mean, we actually made an evening of it. We ceremoniously drove the envelope to the mailbox and put it in, and I gave it a wish for luck so we could get it. And so when we found out we got it, it was a lot of excitement.
As the weeks bled off the calendar that summer, the team's staff worked long hours with little sleep, trying to get a mountain of tasks completed before the team kicked off at the Hoosier Dome for their first preseason game that August.
You could work 24 hours a day for 6 months and still not be where you wanted to be, really. I had a recurring nightmare I would wake up that I overslept for our opener, and it was like a recurring nightmare. And I'd get to the game and it was like halftime.
One of the biggest challenges, as it would turn out, would be just getting tickets in the hands of fans who bought them. Because the Colts didn't know where they'd be playing in 1984 until late March, and because they completed their lottery just a few weeks later, there was no guarantee tickets would be printed and in the hands of the people that bought them before the Colts' preseason opener on August 11th, 1984 against the New York Giants. Hall begged the company that printed the Colts tickets to speed up the process. They couldn't.
We were really, really behind any normal process for any team, and did our best to accelerate everything, including asking a company out of Arkansas that printed the tickets then to expedite things. And they said for a number of reasons they really couldn't. We offered to pay more money. We said, hey, can you put a third shift on? Can you do Saturdays? We're kind of already doing that, So it's getting closer and closer to the first game, and we're really thinking to ourselves, what's the plan B? Is there a plan B if we can't physically get someone a ticket? So we started literally thinking, is there a way? Do you just have to at some point open the gates and trust people?
The Colts ultimately had to hand-deliver some tickets just before that first game at the Hoosier Dome to ensure all 60,236 fans could get in the door to the seats they had purchased.
I remember different people's personalities and how we all got along, and that common cause, and knowing that this is such a abbreviation. I'll call it a short runway. You got to stick the landing. I would imagine, I haven't done that, but I've seen video of landing on an aircraft carrier where you got to get it right, because if you don't, the game's going to happen anyway, right? And you'll deal with whatever issues happen.
There's maybe never been more buzz for a preseason game than when the Colts kicked off against the Giants that August.
Without looking it up, we won 26-20. It's funny. It was. You think about the movie Rudy when Ned Beatty says, "This is the greatest thing I've ever seen." And that's what as a football player, that's what we felt. We stopped at the top of the concourse. And when we first walked in, and you just stop and just look around, and even though it was a preseason game, the crowd was just raucous. It was loud, it was fun, and it's one of those games that I'll never forget.
But the attention on the game wasn't all good.
It was crazy, and we had so many death threats and everything else, and so the FBI or whatever agency gave me a bulletproof vest and a gun for my ankle. And they said, this is optional for the first Giant preseason game. My wife saw me put it on, and she was like, "What the hell are you doing?" I go, "Well, some bitch comes after us, I'm going to be prepared,
Most people in Baltimore, of course, were not going to commit a felony over losing their team. But it's important to remember that Indianapolis's gain of a team came at a cost. Bill Hudnut even admitted that, saying in a TV interview in 1984 that he felt sorry for the people of Baltimore. But he also emphasized he had to do right by Indianapolis as the city's mayor. Debbie Knox, the longtime Wish TV reporter, certainly spared a thought for Baltimore amid Indianapolis' celebration.
I just remember having a little bit of sort of felt sorry for the people of Baltimore, because at the time they didn't have the Ravens, so here they were bereft, what now?
Back in Baltimore, in the days and weeks following the Colts' move, there were a few prevailing emotions among the population. While Indianapolis was able to puff out its chest as an NFL city, all of a sudden, Baltimore was deflated to no longer be able to say that.
It was hard to see people who were really attached to that organization and to the idea of an NFL team.
Jane Miller reported for WBAL-TV from Owings Mills the night the Colts moved.
I think that's one of the things I really learned throughout my career, particularly in Baltimore, because it went through this. There's kind of a psyche about having an NFL team that is really pretty powerful, and that people were really missed the idea of it. A team may not have been all that good at the end of the day, but certainly the fact that the Colts got, everybody, refers to it as being stolen, stolen away in the middle of the night. So the fact that happened, I think, really a lot of people were very, very sad.
John Zeman, the leader of the Colt band who was auditioning drummers for the 1984 season the night the Colts moved, remembered an empty feeling waking up on March 29th.
The next day, commerce was moving in Baltimore. Nobody died. The sun came up, but we lost a big part of our heart. And the way it was done was heartbreaking.
For the city of Baltimore, losing the Colts, even if most people were resigned to that outcome by the time the team left, it was still a baffling feeling.
There are certain things in life. We just went through one of them here in Baltimore with the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. There are certain things in life where you look at as permanent, and all of a sudden they're not.
Jerry Sandusky is a Baltimore native and is the voice of the Ravens.
The Baltimore Colts were a permanent part of this town. You can make a case that the Baltimore Colts and the Baltimore Orioles are the axis that this town kind of gravitated around in winter and in spring and in football season and baseball season. And to have one of them removed was so devastating and disorienting.
Baltimore Mayor William Donald Schaefer gave a dour press conference outside his home the day after the Colts left, But a few days later, he tried to put a smile on the face of his residents.
It was a Monday morning in downtown Baltimore. Some of the curbs had been painted pink for his pink positive day. He realized that the whole mood was very dim and, trying to cheer up the place.
But among the sadness that permeated the city of Baltimore, there was also hope and determination. For years, state and local officials didn't think the Colts would actually leave, but they were worried about the chances their much more successful baseball team would skip town. The loss of the Colts, painful as it was, spurred action to begin working to keep the Orioles, who won the World Series 5 months before Mayflower vans showed up in Owings Mills.
The second the shock settled in '84 that, hey, wait a second, if the Baltimore Colts aren't actually a permanent part of this community, the Baltimore Orioles could move too.
All of a sudden, the roles between Baltimore and Indianapolis were kind of reversed. For years, Indianapolis had worked hard to keep the Pacers, knowing if their NBA team left, their chances of getting an NFL team were slim to none. Now, for Baltimore, there was an urgency to keep their Major League Baseball team, knowing if the Orioles were to leave, the chances they'd get another NFL team were pretty slim. On January 20th, 1985, the Baltimore Sun reported that Mayor William Donald Schaefer was lobbying the Maryland state legislature for funds to build a new stadium for the Orioles. And after years of strain between the mayor's office and state government over stadium funding, state delegates were starting to shift their stance. One delegate told the Sun, quote, "Something should be done to make sure the Orioles don't leave and encourage the NFL to put a team here." Eventually, the shock of the Colts leaving did spur action. There would be a new stadium for the Orioles, and it wasn't just a new stadium. Oriole Park at Camden Yards, which opened in 1992, began a wave of retro-inspired Major League Baseball parks, and that home of the Orioles is still regarded as one of baseball's best stadiums, and it's still a source of pride for people in Baltimore. And Camden Yards ensured the Orioles would stay in Baltimore.
Now you've got the footprint that, okay, this team's not moving, which makes it really idyllic when a few years later you bring in the Ravens and they set up shop right next door and you have this magnificent downtown ballpark complex and it rejuvenates the city, and all of a sudden Baltimore gets to step back into some of its glory days.
Baltimore was passed over when the NFL expanded in 1995, much to the anger and frustration of a city that had worked hard to not only support the Orioles, but to show it was still a destination for the NFL. A major part of those efforts was the Colt Band, led by Zeman, which stayed together after the team moved. It's the subject of a fantastic ESPN 30 for 30 called The Band That Wouldn't Die. But by 1995, Cleveland Browns owner Art Modell was experiencing the same stadium-related pains Carroll Rosenblum and Robert Irsay went through in Baltimore. Cleveland was not willing or able to build the Browns a new stadium, and their home of Cleveland Stadium was deteriorating. Baltimore offered the promise of a new stadium if Modell moved his ball club. On November 6, 1995, Modell announced that the Cleveland Browns would play their final game in Ohio that year, and they would relocate to Baltimore for the 1996 season. It would be the second time Baltimore gained a team called the Browns and renamed them after a bird. The news brought elation and relief to NFL fans in Baltimore, but it also came with some mixed emotions because everyone in Baltimore remembered what they went through just over a decade prior.
1996 rolls around and the Cleveland Browns move to Baltimore. And we're on the other end of the move. And so we understood what they were going through in Cleveland. And as excited as we were in Baltimore to see the NFL return, it was a little tricky having lived on both sides of having somebody's heart ripped out. Once, you're on the receiving end, once you're on the losing end.
The Baltimore Ravens, 28 years later, are one of the NFL's model franchises. They've won 2 Super Bowls, and they're a consistent contender in the AFC. They have their own franchise legends, from Ray Lewis to Terrell Suggs to Joe Flacco and now Lamar Jackson. But for those old enough to remember the Baltimore Colts, there's still this lingering sense of loss.
I was angry about it for so long, bro. I landed at your airport and I went in past the kolache stand into Center City for years and would see that Colts shop in the mall. It would piss me off.
Nestor Aparicio is a radio host in Baltimore.
I told you how angry it made me just to see the horseshoe. Like, no bullshit, dude. Like real angry. It felt very stolen to me. It felt like a little piece of my soul's been taken.
Time, they say, heals all pain. But losing the Colts, I don't think it will in Baltimore, especially with the older generation. You got to realize now, let's face it, in Baltimore and Indy, they're going to say there was a Baltimore Colts. The Indy Colts were in Baltimore.
The success of the Ravens might be a happy ending to the story in Baltimore, but maybe the best way to put it is that it's complicated. For some, the animosity toward the Colts and Robert Irsay has not faded. For others, it has.
All these years later, I'm 55 now. It's like a second marriage. It's like a marriage you had in your 20s, or a girlfriend you had at high school, or the girl you went to prom with. All these years later, you're happy she's in Indianapolis living a good life and, had a Super Bowl and whatever.
I don't have any enmity towards Indianapolis. Mayor Hodnett was smart enough to see the landscape of the NFL and took advantage of it. He played the game to the advantage of it. He did his job. The politicians in Baltimore misplayed it. The politicians in Cleveland misplayed it. And other cities benefited and lost from the way they played the game.
I see that horseshoe, and I see the good times, the championships, the love I had for this professional football team, the pride I had in this team. But my heart belongs to the birdie head helmet. That's my team. That's my team.
No city is ever happy or okay with losing their team, of course. But there is something different about Baltimore losing the Colts, as Jerry Sandusky explained to me.
Those other moves did not have those historical threads that we were talking about with beating the biggest cities, producing the biggest stars, giving birth to coaching legends. They didn't have that.
And because of the depth of the Colts' roots in Baltimore, the pain, it just won't go away for some people there.
For people over probably 50 years old in Baltimore, there's still a touch of pain for a lot of them. And a lot of them still will not say the Indianapolis Colts, they'll just say the Colts. Look, it did work out great for Indianapolis. And here's the one that I remind people of now. The Colts have been in Indianapolis longer than they were in Baltimore. I don't know that things work out the way they should. Things work out the way they do. And they just worked out the way they do. And over time, the Baltimore Colts will become like the Brooklyn Dodgers, where people who aren't older don't even know that really the Colts played in Baltimore?
So that's the postscript to our story in Baltimore. But the other part of this story is how Indianapolis, over the last 40 years, has made good on its opportunity to be an NFL city. Just this spring, demand for Colts season tickets was so high that a waiting list was created to secure 2025 season tickets. Trust me, Colts fans are as loud, loyal, passionate, and knowledgeable as any fan base in the NFL. That development into one of the best fan bases in the league, though, didn't happen overnight.
What was evident once the season started was that it was a basketball state with a tremendous heritage, because whenever the offense got in the field, they were cheering. So we kind of had to hold our hands down, like, no, you cheer when they're on defense.
I'll never forget it. People were cheering everything. Everything. They would cheer everything. Didn't matter. It was clear. All I knew is they had an NFL team.
And I do remember that season, seeing a lot of people reading the newspaper. They just hadn't learned. They weren't avid NFL fans in '84. The crowd was really into NFL football. They'd spent their lives watching the Packers or Bears on TV, and here's finally NFL football's in Indianapolis. But there was not a speck of blue in the crowd. Not a speck of blue. Unless somebody's wearing something by accident.
There was a learning curve to becoming a crowd, I think.
There were reasons to be optimistic as the 1984 season began, and not just because the Colts were making their Indianapolis debut. In 1983, the Colts were 6-4 at one point, and while they stumbled to a 7-9 finish, the hope was a young roster led by Frank Cush and bolstered by 2 top 20 draft picks could give Indianapolis a playoff contender right away.
We gotta play New England, Miami, and the Jets. The Niners, Browns, and Chargers, plus both them LA threats. Lord help our Colts. Lord help our Colts.
The Colts lost 3 of their first 4 games, including when they blew a 9-point lead in their second game at the Hoosier Dome, which wound up being a 1-point loss to the St. Louis Cardinals.
It started out pretty good. We lost our opener, and then we won our second game. It was at Houston. We won it pretty handily. We really played well. And then we came home and played St. Louis. And we were kicking their ass, and the crowd was so excited. We were really doing well, and then they came from behind and kicked a field goal with, I think, a few seconds remaining and won. And then things kind of went downhill from there.
COLTS, the schedule is a mess. Lord help our
The Colts won just 2 of their 8 games at the Hoosier Dome that season, and they lost their final 5 games, finishing their first year in Indianapolis with a 4-12 record. Head coach Frank Kush resigned with 1 week left in the season to go coach in the USFL. The team he left the Colts for? The Arizona Outlaws, who played in Phoenix.
I think when we didn't move to Phoenix, that kind of sealed it for him, and he left to go to the USFL in December, before the end of the season.
The Hoosier Dome is lovely. It's really quite a sight. But when the team plays football, things never work out right. Lord help our hoes. Ooh, yes. Lord help our hoes.
We stumbled a little bit, and we never really caught our momentum. It was just kind of awkward. So you can blame it on transition, but I just think we were a really, really young team, and we kind of thrived on the confidence factor. So we were just young. I think in essence, we were playing with reckless abandon in '83, and maybe with all the changes in '84, it was just a little bit much for us.
I felt like it was such a disappointment, and it was a disappointment from the standpoint that here we had a fan base that was just ready to roll, and we didn't provide them with the kind of team that they could really jump on top of.
The Colts won just 12 games over their first 3 seasons in Indianapolis, inspiring Duke Tomato to write and perform the folksy Lord Help Our Colts tune on the Bob and Tom Show. But even with those early struggles, the vibes around the city were still good regarding their new football team.
Even though they didn't have great success early, right? You've just felt they were building something.
Jimmy Matus is an Indianapolis native and a former radio host in our city.
Not a great deal of on-field success, but still building something in the community that was ours and to be cherished.
The interest and appreciation for the Colts was born partly from it being the NFL, which in the 25 years since the Colts' triumph over the New York Giants in the greatest game ever played, had passed baseball to become America's dominant, most popular sport. But for Indianapolis residents, the Colts represented something bigger than just a football team.
Obviously, the Pacers were already here, but the NFL has a certain level of prestige that just added to the prestige of Indianapolis.
It was like we've gotten to the promised land.
NFL is just something different. It elevates the city. It just does when you're one of whatever it would have been back there, 28 teams or whatever.
When the Colts arrived, it was as if Indianapolis had arrived.
Glory and praise to our men so bold, worthy of honors and fame untold, forging ahead to attain their goal, the Indianapolis Colts to conquer and win the Super Bowl.
All the work put into downtown Indianapolis by mayors Richard Lugar and Bill Hudnut, by movers and shakers like David Frick and Jim Morris, and by the support of the community, had built to this crescendo. Indianapolis was no longer this sleepy little town known for basketball and race cars in the middle of flyover country. Indianapolis was now an NFL city with an established presence on American TV sets every Sunday between September and December.
It's certainly built our reputation.
Tom Griswold is the longtime host of the Bob and Tom Show, which has been broadcast from Indianapolis since 1983. The song we're playing, by the way, is called In Praise of the Indianapolis Colts, and it was sung by Luciano Gaspacho on the Bob and Tom Show in the 1980s.
Here's a really pretentious 1%er example I'm going to give, because that's what I do. I was skiing. I've been skiing for years, and I don't know if you ski or not, but when you do, you have occasion to get on a chairlift with a bunch of strangers or whatever it might be. Back in the day, you'd get on the chairlift and someone would go, "Where are you from?" And you'd say, "Indianapolis." Go, "Oh, yeah, that's where the 500 is." Pretty soon, about the late 80s, it was suddenly, Oh, yeah, you guys got the Colts.
Bob Irsay took his team and began to roam. Mayor Hudnut said, hey, here's a brand new dome. Baltimore was so mad that their mouths did foam. But now raise a cheer, the Colts are right here, they found a new home.
In the 40 years since the Colts moved to Indianapolis, the metropolitan area's population has boomed from about 860,000 to nearly 2 million in 2024. And at a time when some other Midwestern and Rust Belt cities have experienced population declines, Indianapolis and the surrounding area have grown. A lot went into that, of course. But at least a small part of it, I think it's fair to say, is because Indianapolis has had a national and international presence, thanks to its NFL team.
Indy wasn't just a ghost town at all. I'm not saying that, but it was centered around the track and basketball. And the NFL, coming here, it just elevated the city's reputation, presence, and all of that. And we've seen how it's grown exponentially since then.
And over the Colts' 40 years in Indianapolis, the team has become as deeply ingrained in this community as it was in Baltimore. Jim Irsay and his family didn't just bring Indianapolis a Super Bowl trophy. They've invested in the community through several initiatives, the latest being Kicking the Stigma, which over the last few years has made real positive change to our state's mental health services. Peyton Manning helped bring Indianapolis not just a championship, but a children's hospital, a new stadium, and scores of locals born after 1998 named after him. And today, something that always strikes me about the Colts is how supportive the entire team is of the community. I think about how Kenny Moore II ran out of the tunnel in 2019 with Mighty Mason Garvey, a 9-year-old with terminal cancer who the Colts cornerback befriended. I think about T.Y. Hilton, the South Florida native star wide receiver who stayed in the area after his playing career ended, showing up to almost every Indiana Fever game. I think about going out in the community to playgrounds or farmers markets or restaurants and spotting current players mingling with locals. And, more than anything, I think about how hard it is to imagine Indianapolis, the city we know today, without the Colts.
For the most part, a lot of the gentlemen who have played for the Colts have been gentlemen and real quality people, which I think has been extremely helpful. And it makes the city and all the people here kind of proud. We've got some really good people that are part of our group here in town.
Glory and praise to our men so bold, worthy of honors and fame untold, forging ahead to attain the goal, to conquer and win the Super Bowl.
Thank you for listening to The Move. All 4 episodes are available to download on the Colts Audio Network. Episode 4 of The Move was written and narrated by JJ Stankevitz and produced by Casey Valier. Amber Darrow, Dave Knickerbocker, and Matt Taylor contributed with research and editing.